Welcome, everyone, to a very, very special episode of Seaweed Brain. We are two childhood friends and lifelong fans of Percy Jackson who have spent the last 3.5 years reading through the Riordanverse to prepare to discuss the Disney Plus adaptation together with you. And today we have a very incredible special guest to help us achieve that dream. Daphne Olive, staff writer of Percy Jackson and the Olympians, is in the house. Stick around. Hello, Daphne. Welcome to Seaweed Brain.
Hi, it's so nice to be here. I'm really thrilled.
I am Erica, joined as always by my co-host, Carter.
Hi. And we are in the same place today, sharing a mic.
You know how that goes. If it sounds weird, that's why. We are so excited to talk to Daphne, who is not only famous now, but also in a previous life was an analysis podcaster. So Daphne, would you like to tell us a bit about your incredible job and the jobs you have had before, and what led you to be speaking with us today?
Yeah, it's a funny route. I started out as a jewelry designer. I mean, I guess officially I am still a jewelry designer, although I don't spend that much time doing that anymore.
I learned that when I first stalked your website, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so beautiful.
They're like, why is this website full of jewelry?
Yes.
So I was always a person who listened to, if not podcasts, because that's a relatively newer thing, but I used to listen to books, NPR, pretty much anything to occupy my mind while I make jewelry, because making jewelry can be repetitive and boring, although also very fun. And I realized at some point, like kind of when podcasts started really being a thing, like that I could find podcasts where people analyzed stories, and which was my favorite hobby, to the point where I would bore most of my friends incredibly after.
We're familiar.
Any book or television show or movie. So I started listening to podcasts like that, and then I fell in love with a TV show called Black Sails. I looked for a podcast talking about Black Sails, and there was none. So I proceeded at that point to go all over Twitter to all the podcasters I liked and try to get them to watch it and talk about it, because almost no one was watching it, sadly.
Oh my gosh, you ran a campaign
before
you became a podcaster.
People.
Oh, wow.
Yes, I was one of those people. Exactly. And I kind of like gotten to be friends with some podcasters and stuff. And then one of them, Elizabeth Stevens, the best person, she said, great, I would love to do a podcast about this show that you just made me watch because it's amazing, but I will only do it with you. And I had never recorded my voice, even used to be nervous about recording my voice, even like on an answering machine. So we did it. We started a podcast. We thought no one was going to listen. The cast started listening, the writers started listening, and the showrunner eventually started listening, and that is John Steinberg, the showrunner also of Percy Jackson and the Olympians. And they all eventually came on our podcast, and John and I got to be friends. And at some point along the way, he decided that the way I talk about stories means that maybe I should be helping write them.
Oh my God. My heart is melting.
I was terrified, but they brought me on to work on their other show called The Old Man. So I started there, and then when they started working on Percy Jackson, they brought me along for that too. And it's great because I had never read the books, and I read all 5 in the series that is now 6, but was then 5. I fell in love with the story, and it's just been honestly a delight from the beginning until now, and just continues to be.
So do you still make jewelry?
Well, officially I do. I mean, you said you looked at the website. The website still exists. My jewelry business was one where I mostly would sell to stores. So every once in a while, stores still, even though I don't really promote it, people I have worked with will still place orders, and I'll fill them. And I have a store. I have a store in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
So my jewelry is also in my own store.
A woman of many talents. I have to ask a little bit about like the writer's room, because to go from, as you said, being like somebody who's very thoughtful and who has podcast about stories, but isn't necessarily like in that physical space. Like, what was it like to be pulled into the actual creative process and to like be present with all of those people?
I was very lucky because it felt gradual, because the writer's room for season 1 of The Old Man was literally the 3 people who made Black Sails. and me. So like, I
Right.
guess on some level, extremely intimidating, but also at the same time, like they kind of all knew my story. Like they understood why I was with them because they invited me. And so it was a really wonderful way to be introduced to the process because I was with three people who knew the
Yeah.
process so well and completely understood how clueless I was about the process. And so I got to learn the process along with them.
Yeah.
Also, I'll just probably continue to say this throughout, like just the most generous souls in the world. And so by the time the Percy Jackson writers room started, I like had a better sense of how this works. And
Mhm.
I was very lucky that the Percy Jackson writers room has been just full of amazing people, really just wonderful, wonderful people.
Yeah. I could wax on for a long time about like artistic
Mhm.
mentorship and how
Mhm.
wonderful it is to see that play out in our own fandom now that John is such a producer's producer and such like an artist's artist who like sees potential in people and wants to bring them in. Like that is one of the greatest joys of life, I feel like, is watching that kind of relationship play out and turn into art and into stories. Okay, that's enough from me. That's enough from me. I love TV. So Phoebe from Monster Donut, our wonderful friend Phoebe, I think at one point she mentioned to me that your role in the Percy Jackson writers room is almost like story consultant, that like you really are looking at the bigger picture. How would you describe your role? I think
Yeah.
you're credited as staff writer, whereas some other people are credited as writer.
Right. So, I mean, part of that is just the hierarchical nature of writers and the WGA and how that works. So, like, you start out as a staff writer.
Mhm.
I'm now working on season 2 of The Old Man, and I'm no longer a staff writer. I got bumped up to story editor, which is the next.
Oh,
But again, these roles, there's not actually really a difference between staff writer and story editor. Like I'm in the writer's room
Yeah.
and everyone fills the role that they fill. And yeah, Phoebe and I have talked about it a lot because of what she does. And it became this kind of joke that like without knowing what I am really or what my process is, like you could kind of call me a dramaturg. It's this funny thing. Like, so yeah, it is hard to like say this is what I do, but a lot of what I do
Yeah.
is thinking about the big picture, thinking about themes. Like I see myself as a person who helps individuals and the group in whatever, I mean, honestly, in whatever way possible. So like sometimes it is bringing in stuff from the outside, like, fun extra mythological stuff. Sometimes it is being, the person who's honestly constantly thinking, wait, we can speak in spoiler speak, right? Yes.
Yes.
Um,
This is a spoiler episode.
Right. So sometimes, it's like being the person who's just like constantly talking about the great prophecy and the end game.
Yes.
Like, and like, how can we,
Yes.
so there's just so many ways. Like, it's just like, sometimes I'm helping with scene work, sometimes I'm helping, but like a lot of it is just like, however I can help the process. Like in the writer's room, we're all doing that. Like that is literally what everyone's doing in the writer's room.
Right.
But it's just like, I feel like those are the things I'm good at. And what you want in a good writer's room are people who are good at different things. So it's just like, I see shapes.
Yeah.
Like I don't know how to explain it exactly, but just like I love to see story shapes.
Yes.
And that's like a really fun thing for me. I love like imagining emotional shapes. Like I love, this is one of the great things about this adaptation is that to take a story that is so deeply in first person narrative and then have to find who all these people are aside from the way Percy feels about them has been so much fun. It's such an amazing opportunity because the story is so beautiful. So it's so fun to find new angles that fit in the existing story.
Oh my God.
And a lot of it, again, just because we get to inhabit other people's heads. In addition to Percy's.
Yeah. I don't know. When you said that, I was picturing like scaffolding. Like you're putting up buildings all around this like Percy's narrative is the central idea, but we're like creating a city now with everybody else.
Exactly.
And that is, I think, what is so exciting as fans of the books to get to watch like, oh, wow, like Luke is a real person.
And there are things about him that we can
As he should
observe
be.
that Percy maybe cannot observe.
Yeah, that maybe Percy's perspective isn't picking up on these things because he's a 12-year-old boy, which was something Rick mentioned about Medusa.
Right. Which Luke is just, begging. He was begging to be a fully fleshed out character because he
Yeah.
is so interesting. And
Yeah.
right, I mean, he's just like, I think in the books, the relationship is presented in this beautiful complexity, but
Yeah.
again, just from Percy's side. So like
Yeah.
Mhm.
sitting in, Luke's head
Yeah.
theoretically is just so much fun because right, I can speak as right. I
I
just,
know, right?
he's a fascinating character. He is actually, I mean, if you listen to my podcast, he is my favorite kind of character because
Yes.
my favorite kind of character is someone who means well, but maybe makes a few choices that take them in the wrong
Yeah.
direction.
Something I've been thinking about a lot the past couple weeks is how excited I am. Gods be willing 5 seasons of this show to see Luke be developed so much more and to see him have this like more anti-hero role against Percy, because we'll just be able to know so much more about him. Like we'll be able to see him in scenes beyond Percy having dreams about him in the later books. He gets up to so much trouble. I have so many questions about the Princess Andromeda years and all of that.
It's funny. I've now forgotten officially what his fatal flaw is, but
Luke?
I don't think they canonically.
they don't say.
I would
like
assume
should
it's
know
Hughes,
this,
but
right, exactly. I mean, that's the thing is like
same as Annabeth.
the whole twist of him being quote unquote the hero is, ultimately the thing he wanted most in the world. It breaks my heart. I love it.
Don't, Charlie. You got this, kid. Like, you got this, my dude. Speaking of shapes, question about pacing, because in our years of thinking about these books and how they fit into an 8-episode series, I don't know how much of that was sort of like sorted out before you stepped into the writer's room for it, but like what would go in what episode and how to get in and out of camp so quickly.
And like how much of the episodes would have an episode shape as opposed to the thing that I think was really popular a few years ago and is still popular now of basically having, like episodes that compose a 6-hour movie. Like I feel like these episodes really are episodes and there's a beginning, middle, and end to each product.
Right.
And like that also feels like not inevitable. And we're curious about what goes into that decision-making process.
Well, it was all outlined at the beginning. And I mean, it's funny, like as a former podcaster, I'm very aware of like the whole controversy over the idea of a 6-hour movie.
Yeah, right.
Right. But I'm going to middle that like a little bit is because I feel like I hate saying prestige TV, but like in television that has fewer episodes, right? Television that's not 20, 25 episodes in a season. I think that the idea of a movie is right and wrong. Like each episode has its acts, right? But you want each one to be its own unit that makes sense as a unit. But you do want to look at a season when it is 6, 8, 10, even 12 episodes. You want to look at the season as having acts as well.
Yes.
So you see what I'm saying? It's like it needs to feel like ideally, not needs to, ideally, it would feel like a 6 to 8 hour movie. And each of those portions of the movie, the episodes, feel like unique objects of their own.
Yes.
Like, so when it's done in the best way, it's actually doing both of those things at the same time.
Yes.
Which I'm not going to say anything about what we did, but that was, I feel like the intent was, I mean, there was definitely part of the process is like, what is the episode about? In addition to what purpose does it serve in the larger story of the season of, it all works out well of the 5-season story, like, but you want all of those building blocks to align so that each episode has a what is it about, and then those what is it about for each of those episodes fits together into a story that has a what is it about for the season.
Yeah.
Yes. Wow. First of all, I think that this show, and I'll say this, is very successful in doing that. We're recording this on the day that episode 4 is dropping. And to me, we've only seen up to episode 4. That's what we got screeners for. When we saw the end of episode 4, we were like mid-season finale. Mid-season finale. Like this was the first act out of 2. Like it feels like everything is building up to the end of episode 4 when Percy is able to step in to his identity and like really embrace the rest of the quest. And that pacing was just so miraculous. But using that idea of what is each episode about, I feel like we have a question about in episode 3, which John said in the Variety article, he credits much of that episode to you. So I'm excited to talk about it with you. The new piece of lore about monsters being able to smell different things, like your weaknesses at different moments. Grover delivers this line talking about Electo. I don't know if you want to explain this, Carter. This was kind of your observation.
As we were talking about it, we were like, this is the way that you set up like television. This is like the way that you like have an in-universe reason to have the thing of like where the English teacher is always talking about a book that is like directly relevant to whatever like personal heartbreak every student is going through in a TV show, you know? But like now it seems like it makes sense. Like when the episode is about like family and the relationships that cross generations, there's like a reason why a particular monster now is like going to come after them.
In episode 3, we were talking about betrayal and trust and what was going to happen between these characters. And so Medusa is present to like highlight betrayal and the mistrust between, you know, their parents, that whether or not it's going to play out between the two of them. We were like, this is such an interesting piece of lore, but it also feels like such a great storytelling device. And I don't know if we hallucinated that or if, and you can also say pass and no comment at any time.
It's a funny thing to walk that line between wanting to talk about it and definitely not wanting to tell people how to understand what our intent was.
Yes.
So I know that Medusa is not literally the first monster that they encounter, but on many levels, she is like the first kind of featured monster in that way. Quote unquote monster, I will say, to be true to our show. I remember that just felt like a huge stroke of good luck. For me personally, because I have been obsessed with Medusa and Athena as a story forever. So that was just super fun for me personally. But in addition to that, the thing that's so interesting about Medusa on so many levels is that she weirdly, or not weirdly, or intentionally, Uncle Rick, we'll see. But like she's so perfect as their introduction, not just to the world of, not just to the mythological world, but to each other, right? Because even though, you know, on many levels, Percy is a Theseus, not a Perseus, but, you know, that's just my thing.
Yes.
But weirdly, he's a Theseus and a Perseus, right? Like he is Theseus in that, you know, he didn't know who he was and that his father was beside it. And like, it's such a Theseus story. And Theseus was also a person who was like a bringer together of people.
Yeah.
I knew I was going to end up doing this. Like, I was trying not to go down my Theseus road, but it was
Please
bound to happen
do.
sooner or later.
Yeah.
Yes, one of my favorite, like one of the most important books to me, and one of, other than my name, which is really why I started reading Greek mythology. The other thing that made me love Greek mythology is a book called The King Must Die, which is the Theseus story.
Okay.
Could not recommend.
We'll link it in our show notes.
So this is Mary Renaud, and it's old. Like I think it's from the 50s. I feel like I should know this better than I do. All of her books are great, but that's a different podcast.
Okay, cool.
But The King Must Die is really a beautiful book about the responsibility of leaders, about community, about the gods, about the relationship between humans and the gods, about fate. But it's so interesting, back to Medusa, it's so interesting in how many ways she intersects with our characters, right? So like there's the literal thing of like, you have a son of Poseidon and a daughter of Athena, right? So that's obvious. But the place that she holds, I think, you know, for me, and I think what made it fun in the show is that she's the perfect example of what it means to be not a god. So I'm going to include lots of different categories of characters. What it means to be not a god living in the vicinity of gods.
Oh, ow.
And I think that, you know, if I was going to boil down this story to like one thematic concept that really speaks to me, it is that. It is how difficult it is to be, whether, you know, if we're going to say mortal for humans plus demigods, or human, or a monster, who are part of the family, which I can say now, since episode 4 it will have already dropped. To be not a god and in their vicinity is dangerous. It can be exciting. It can be a lot of things, but ultimately it is not easy. And I think that if you look at all of the characters in this whole story of, again, demigods and not demigods, what they are all struggling with, the thing they all have in common is, how do I exist in a world in the vicinity of gods? And each person answers that in their own way. And that feels like the different ways. Sometimes they are aligned, and sometimes they are in contrast, and sometimes they're in
Yes.
complete opposition. The choices that people make in that reality is the basis of this story for me. And,
for sure.
I love young adult fiction. So, like, ultimately, then you're going to always bring this back to, like, what does this mean for children in
Yes.
transition to adulthood, which is
Yes.
a complete parallel to this idea where adults, if we're leaving the mythological world behind and we're just talking about humans, like, that is relevant. Like, what is it to
Yes.
become a preteen and a teen? It is to phase from a position of less power in relation to adults to becoming one. What does that mean? What do you want to, how do you want to exist in relationship to that hierarchy? So I feel like, aside from the feminist story, which is, I think it's pretty clear what we were doing with that one, so I don't have to talk about it. But she brings this out for, honestly, all three of them, not just Annabeth and Percy, but for all three of these kids. They have to figure out, like, she just kind of puts them in a place where they have to really not declare themselves exactly, although obviously they do a little bit of that, but like, she makes them think. She shows them where they are not aligned and where they are aligned. And again, it's a great introduction for us to then play off of that in ways I'm not going to talk about, because they've only seen half of the season.
My God, I know what's going on in my brain right now is something you've experienced before as a podcaster, where you're just like, the light bulbs are like pinging, and like everything. Like, I thought so much about Sally during what you just said, and what a great way to bring her into this episode and to just expand her more in this season is to think about her as somebody who exists in this world of gods but is not a god, and how she navigates that and experiences that as a very real and full person is something we don't necessarily get to think about in the books, that is so beautifully being brought to the forefront here, especially with the way that Medusa brings up Sally and is like, aligns herself in her head with Sally in this scenario to Percy.
We're so blessed it's such a great thing to be able to adapt a story that is full. Like, I mean, I know there's other books after these 5, but like, there's things like, I remember when I was reading them for the first time, and it was like, I read the first book a few times before I moved on to the other books. When we found out that Sally was a seer, like, that's one of the great moments. Like, I was just like, it was, for me, it was just like clicked. It was just like, so much of the beginning of the story, like, with this retroactively applied to it, like, has so much more meaning to it, right? Because it means that she really was part of this world. She's not just a human, right? Like, seers are so interesting because they are part of the world without their choice, right?
And with such a lack of power.
Right. But they didn't choose to be part of it, but they are, because they're seers. And so, like, in a way, a parent who's a seer is in a lot of ways better equipped, but also tragically better equipped to help their children. So, like, this is Sally, this is May. Like, it's just like these characters who, like, it's not just like, what's going on with my kid? It was like, I know what's going on with my kid, and there's nothing I can do about it.
Ow, ow, ow. Ow.
No, it's like such an important parallel to bring up, especially because, like, at the end of this book, like, one of the lines that stuck with me as like a kid reading this was Percy looking at his mom and like having that whole smelly gay moment and being like, this is a moment for both of us to realize that, like, there are some things that we need to just watch other people do, even people we love. And for that to be like, for Sally basically to go this like little microcosm of like what is going to end up being Percy's entire 5-book journey, just like in the first book
of what do I do with this power?
What do I do with this power? What does it mean for me to, or like specifically, like Sally has like a moment where like when she lets Percy go back to camp after all of this quest goes down.
If my life is going to mean anything, I have to live it myself.
It's that, and it's both of them being like, we need to like yield with respect to each other's lives, and like that moment, like foreshadowing, but then also like building into Percy having a moment like years later where he is going to be like not everything is about me doing something or exerting control.
Yeah.
I guess ultimately what we're saying is that everything is traced back to Sally and the richness of the character.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said yielding, because that was a word it's like if you did what are those things called? Word clouds of how many times we've said a certain word on our podcast. I think yielding would be the second biggest underneath Percabeth. Because we felt that concept of like Percy gaining power and, learning how to not wield it over others is like how he ends up going about walking into the world as an adult, as a demigod, as somebody who maintains power in this world of the gods.
The person who doesn't need to be, quote unquote, the hero.
Exactly.
Which that's such a fun superpower, right? It's just like, I just feel like it's so special, like that his greatest power is not actually the ones he was born with. It's the ones that are essential to who he is, not what he is.
And it's what he was taught by Sally. That this is the lesson that makes him a hero. And I have to say, like, on my millionth rewatch of episode 1, I finally caught Glenn as Chiron saying in the Met, like, these statues, they show us what we're capable of, as Percy is staring up at Perseus holding the head of Medusa. And that wrecked me to my core, because I was like, what clean writing to lay the foundation for the story that Percy is going to see this violence and think about the violence he is capable of, and then enact some of that violence in this episode.
In episode 3, the moment when I'm wondering if this was in the script, the moment where he literally like assumes the pose of the statue and then immediately like recoils and drops it was
while Annabeth is watching from behind the door gate. We could write an essay about Annabeth watching from behind the gate.
This is like a borderline death of the author violating question, but I think we can have a not, how would you say, like intent absolutist discussion about this. At our little like watch party that we had for the episode, one of our friends like reactions to the end of it was like, that was really good, but I really thought that Medusa was going to be part of the team. They were
my God, that she was going to join the quest.
They were like, I'm surprised that they still killed her at the end of the episode. And like in my head, I like had to pause and think about that and be like, I think that this was the right choice and that it wouldn't have made sense, like even if you set aside the canon of the books existing. But I'm sort of wondering, like, if you like have thoughts on the alternative story value of an ending where Medusa isn't killed, or if you just feel like it's such an inevitability for the way that the story works that it like isn't I don't know, something that you thought about.
No, I'm going to answer this in a hopefully still being a dead voice of the dead author. I feel like as part of my personal process, I can't speak for the other writers, but as part of my personal process, if I haven't imagined scenarios, like imagine not just like structurally, but like imagined emotionally scenarios outside of the way the story ends up going, just because, again, like I said in the beginning, just like inserting myself in the head of a character and imagining all the ways this could play out emotionally for them in a way that's true. So like there is what happens, and then there is what feels true. So your question feels to me like a compliment, because your friend imagined something that felt true and isn't the way it went, which ultimately is like a beautiful thing also in a story where, like, did we want for a minute for Medusa to just join them?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
That means we did our job well, as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely.
So I'm taking this also as a compliment. Thank you. It's just like that you wanted something so much and you don't get it, but you don't get it in a way that also feels satisfying.
Yeah.
Like that to me is like, that's what I'm always searching as a viewer.
Yeah.
And so I guess that's what I'm always hoping for as a storyteller.
Oh, yeah. One of our other friends, like the second Medusa got her head cut off, he was like, wait, what? Like, she's not coming back? Like, that was it? Like, Jessica Parker Kennedy isn't coming back for the rest of the season? He was so sad about it. But ultimately, it is so engaging because, like you said about this being, as a young adult or as a middle grade novel, like the story of having to make choices about who you're going to be coming into this world. Like ultimately, as much as we sympathize with and empathize with Medusa, her objectives are at odds with ours. And so we have to cut her head off. And that is making difficult decisions and moving about the world.
And feel bad about it. And
Right. I mean, we're going to have a lot of characters. Again, my sense of her, which again, it's, this is, please don't treat this as canon. Just like my sense of her is that there was a part of her that is lonely, very lonely even, right?
Oh God.
That her curse was that she cannot be seen. And so I think that there's a part of her that would like nothing more than to just feed people and talk to them and have company, even if they can't look her in the eye. But she's also full of anger, and we understand her anger. Again, if we did our job properly, you understand that. And so she makes choices that go against something, as we all do, right? It's like sometimes we make choices that go against what we want most in the world, and we kind of, not to be totally cliche, but are our own worst enemies. And I feel like that's a big part of her story.
I think we have a question about episode 4. We were sort of just talking before this recording about how there's so much lore that gets dropped in The Lightning Thief that would be like basically impossible to just explain out without it being so exposition-y. And one of the things that hasn't come up yet in 1 through 4 is the gods as like the flame of Western civilization and why they're in the United States. This is particularly a theme that we really dug into in our initial season on the podcast, because we had kind of forgotten about what a metaphor the gods are. And then in episode 4, Grover has a little tiny moment where they're in the St. Louis Arch and Annabeth is talking about how it's a temple to her mom. And then Grover's like, well, it's a this is paraphrasing, it's a temple to a lot of other things too. And there's literally like the blurred out sign of manifest destiny above his head. And we were like, whoa, we just realized in that moment that conversation hadn't been had yet.
And that was us cueing back into this idea that like the gods are standing for something, and the something is going to be like contextually specific in America and up to debate by the characters who are going to have different perspectives on it.
I think we're going to have to put a pin in this one. I guess I can say, since you all did invite me already to come at the end of the season, let's go back to this question at the end of the season.
Oh, I'm so excited.
In a lot of ways, that is an amazing, perfect answer.
That is like the most perfect answer we could have hoped for. For backstory for our listeners, we had communicated about Daphne coming on at the end of the season. And then literally after episode 3, I was like, there's just too much to talk about with Medusa alone. So this is like the Medusa appetizer episode to the full season conversation.
I mean, the Medusa echidna appetizer. Come on.
Exactly.
We need to talk about echidna.
Suzanne Cryer. Yes. Another perfect example of somebody who exists as not a god in the world of the gods and is going to make choices based on her personal experience that are misaligned with our objectives.
But extremely aligned with her own.
Yeah.
Right? Shout out to Suzanne Cryer's niece, who we met at the Met. If she's listening to this.
Oh, yeah, we did.
We gave her a sticker. She was so sweet.
That perspective, that is a frame that I'm going to continue to think about. Like, is everyone being like figures who are like just outside, like proximate to godhood, adjacent to godhood? Her like perspective is different from Medusa's because she's like ancient and like she's always been someone who has been opposing the gods, but like had thoughts about it.
Family, Luke, you promised.
Right, exactly. She's like the branch of the family that isn't invited to Thanksgiving, but like they have their own Thanksgiving, right? Like she's just like, yeah, you're my cousins, but like don't really like you. But I like my family, like my immediate family rocks, and and here's my new baby, or whatever, my newly regenerated baby. But I love that about Greek mythology. Like there's so many messed up things in Greek mythology, but they really are just one big family. Like they are the most messed up family. Like that is like Rick drew from that, but he didn't create that. It is true.
Yes. Yes. We got to ask Rick about like his role in like the greater tradition of storytelling, which I always think about when we have these conversations about like the Riordan verse only exists because Rick pulled on very specific and very true, hilarious things about stories that have been around for eons.
Mhm.
And we're just
Yep.
adapting a story that itself has been adapted so many times.
Yeah.
And being a part of that tradition is so special. Which brings me to Daphne being a writer and being a part of that tradition yourself. You are somebody who is now working in a creative role, where previously you were more in an analysis position when it comes to the industry and storytelling. And I would think we both think of ourselves as more critics than creative people sometimes. But I'm recently working on a creative project myself. And something I keep finding is turning off that critical brain is really hard, and like trusting your gut sometimes to make those creative decisions. I just wonder if you have any experiences with making that transition into the creative role or into like the generative role when it comes to the content as opposed to the receiving
Right.
end of things.
I mean, to be perfectly honest, I feel like my biggest challenge was imposter syndrome. I keep making faces when you call me a writer. Like I think I'm 4.5 years into this now. And I'm like, it took me easily 2 of those years before I actually would say I'm a writer. And that said, the thing that always kept me going, the thing that made me decide I'm allowed to do this and speak up in the room and all of these things is that the person who invited me in is literally my favorite writer. So I just keep telling myself that if John thinks I can do this, then chances are I should be here.
Absolutely.
As far as the critical brain and the creative brain, I don't know. I don't know if I've actually tried to turn anything off. I mean, I feel like the best way to be is just to like turn everything on and just let every part of you be part of this.
Yeah.
That said, there was a lot of stuff I had to learn, right?
Mm.
There were ways that I talked about stories in my podcasts, but there was a lot of stuff like I knew nothing about. So like we never touched like process. We didn't. Very similar, I feel like, to what you all do is like we treated it as literary analysis. We didn't
Right.
talk about like what we think the people's choices were, or trying to guess like, you know, what, director was doing. We just didn't bother with that. We was like, there is text. The show as we have it is text. In
Exactly.
this case, you have dual texts of the books and the show to
Yeah.
discuss, but I've had to learn a lot of that stuff. So it's like learning about editing was huge. Like, and I still have so much to learn, but like the more I learn about editing, the more it helps me understand writing. And that's been fascinating. And like, because I remember at some point just before, when I was still a podcaster, just in our friendship, I remember John saying that the script is, even though there's many drafts of a script, he said that the script is the first draft. And that there's so many layers and so much collaboration and so many elements that end up coming together. And it's just like, that's a big reason why I've tried to spend a lot of time on set, is just understanding. It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
Making a television show is just hundreds of people who are just so talented at something that they're doing, that like maybe it's something you didn't even know is a job, and like they're all the best at that thing, and like all of these things together are what makes it happen. And like getting to sit in on post production, I'm just very lucky that I get to do that sometimes, and just like all of that. So yeah, I think it's best not to turn anything off, and to be open. Like that's the other thing that I think, honestly, I think if I had started, I'm not young, which they can't tell from the podcast. This is essentially my third career, which I started not as a young person. I think if I had done this younger, I wouldn't have been as excited about listening. Because I feel like, just me personally, not that young people aren't good at listening, just me personally, the person who I was and the person I am now, I'm just fascinated by the world. And so that's is such a treat, is just, and it's such an important part of all of this is to be open to learn, because there are so many people to learn from on so many levels of this. And it's just amazing. It's honestly amazing.
There you go. Screenwriters listening to this, future filmmakers. It's all about turning your brains on and listening. I have a silly question to close on, which is, will you tell us about how your daughter's paintings made it into episode 3 in great detail?
I mean, it's funny. This was a process. We are very close. Like, I'm very close with John and Dan. And, they had met her already. They knew her. They knew she was an artist. And it actually was like a while ago that John had suggested maybe, we would, in one of the shows, not necessarily this show, but like that one of her paintings would end up in a show. And she was like a little like honored by that, but a little like, ooh, I don't know. Like, she was nervous about making something specifically for the show. And then out of nowhere, it just turned out when they were in post, a lot of cities have banners like that, and they needed it to cover it with something that wasn't Vancouver. Spoiler, it's not Vancouver. I mean, it's not New York where they get out of the taxi cab. And so John just texted me. He was like, do you have anything ready? Like, anything that she would want to offer up to this. And so she and I went through just the stuff. We weren't even home. So we just went through the pictures that were on my phone. And these are these 2 watercolors that she had done for her art class. One of them is actually a watercolor of toddler her that she did from a photograph of herself. And so, so the small child on the left, that is actually her.
Oh.
And another thing that I didn't tweet about is that the name of the gallery is in honor of my grandmother, Shirley Gallery. And that was my grandma, Shirley, who died while we were working on Percy. And she was a psychoanalyst and probably the biggest influence in my life and worldview. And she used to love, she was not a television watcher, and she actually thought back when I was podcasting, she thought I was working on television then. But so when I got the job, she was like, but you've been working on television this whole time. I was like, yeah. But one of my favorite things to do was to sit and talk. Like, she and I would basically psychoanalyze characters. This was more for the old man than for Percy, but we did it. And so it was like she kind of had a relationship with all of this stuff. So it just felt, it was just a neat opportunity to honor the generation below me and 2 generations above me at the same time. And it was just because he texted me, it was like, do you have some paintings? We need some.
That's so special. That's like the perfect bow of, like, you're just speaking about collaboration and like the beauty of so many different people working on this together to make it happen.
And it's so personal for everyone. Like, that's, it's like everyone has relationships, and that's like, I don't know, that's a neat part of all of it too, is like a show like this is built out of people who just like each other a lot and like what the other people do.
It's like the most unbelievable feeling to reconcile that there's all of these people with all of these jobs, from writer to lizard wrangler, who are working together to tell this story that, like, we care about so much. It's absurd. I can't imagine how Rick and Becky have felt in the past couple years and like in the last month, but it is like the most joyous and like surprising and incredible, uplifting, vindicating feeling that there are so many people working together for this.
That's all we hope for, honestly. It's just like, it's an honor to be able to, obviously to work with Rick and Becky is a huge honor, and to be able to be a small part of translating this story that means so much to so many people, hopefully in a way that also feels meaningful to them. It's just, as someone who came out of a world that, of fandom, it's just, for me, but I think I can speak for everyone. It's such a wonderful opportunity and gift to be able to do this.
Listeners, whether you are folding laundry or cleaning your house or driving right now, I want you to join us in a rousing round of thank you, Daphne. Thank you, Daphne, for not only being on Seaweed Brain today, but also helping to write our favorite story of all time and bring it to the masses with such care and specificity and love and thought. And we can't wait to have you back in like 3 weeks or 4 weeks to talk about the rest of the season.
Wow. It's 4 weeks. This all goes so fast. It's like you work for years on something, and it's just like, oh, in 4 weeks it's done.
And then everyone's like,
Wild.
season two. Thank you so much, Daphne. We really appreciate
Thank
you spending your
you.
evening with us.
Wait, can I do how, what I'm obligated to do at the end of this podcast?
Please. Yes.
I really think that everyone listening should also watch Black Sails.
Yeah! You can stream Daphne's podcast wherever podcasts are heard. Supposedly, Black Sails should be on Netflix any minute now.
Let's hope.
If not, you can join me in creating a free trial for a Stars add-on to your Prime Video account, and I'll be there listening to Black Sails, especially when Percy ends. Oh my God. In like February, March, that's going to be my little dessert. Yeah, my little withdrawal treat.
Tell your friend who was like, I want more Jessica Parker Kennedy. There's just a whole 4 seasons of her.
We're also going to link to Daphne's jewelry in our show notes today. Support every single one of her careers, please. Watch Percy Jackson. Do you have anything else you'd like to promote? The old man?
Does your daughter maybe have like an art Instagram account?
Yeah. Can we buy your daughter's art online?
Oh, wait, she did. It's funny. I don't think it's on my website. She actually did do a series of jewelry of mythological creatures. Like she drew them and then I translated them into jewelry. And the funny thing is that it's a dragon, a phoenix, a unicorn, and a narwhal, because she was making fun of her mom, who thought narwhals aren't real.
That's beautiful. May we all live in mythical, ethereal bliss. Thank you so much, Daphne.
Thank you so much for having me.
And we'll see you in a few weeks.
Yeah. Wow. Wild.
All right. Bye, y'all.
Bye, y'all.